If you had told me 5 years ago that my own son would lock me in my own garage just to impress a woman, I would have laughed in your face. But I'm not laughing now. Not because it broke my heart, though it did. Not because it humiliated me, though it did that too. But because I let him. And that's the part I'm still trying to forgive. Before I tell you what happened, please hit that like button if you believe respect should never depend on your age, and subscribe if you've ever felt unseen in your own home. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every one of them. Let's make this a place where our stories matter. My name is Margaret. I'm 64 years old, I bake a mean peach cobbler, and I can tell when someone's lying before they open their mouth. I wasn't always this alone. For 28 years, I was a nurse, then a wife, then a mother, then a widow, then a mother again, but not the kind you see in Hallmark movies, more like a live-in maid with a savings account. David, my son, was always charming. He had this lopsided smile that made people forgive things they shouldn't have. Teachers, neighbors, even the judge that one time. But that's another story. When his marriage fell apart, he said, "Just for a few months, Mom." That was 3 years ago. At first, I was happy to have him back. Really, the house felt alive again. Music, footsteps, conversation over reheated leftovers. He called me Mama again, like when he was little. My heart held on to that. But little by little, I stopped being his mother and became his background. He started referring to me as the lady I live with. He'd say things like, "Yeah, I rent from my mom. She's kinda retired." Retired? I still did his laundry and made him grilled cheese after work. I knew something had shifted when he started locking the liquor cabinet but left me the house key. One Thursday morning, I heard him humming in the kitchen. I peeked in. He was polishing the silverware. Polishing our silverware. "Big night?" I joked. He jumped. "Mom, you weren't supposed to be up yet." I smiled. "I live here, remember?" He paused. "About that." I knew the moment was coming. The little signs had been adding up. The new cologne, the second toothbrush in the bathroom, the late-night calls with the door closed. Still, I didn't expect what came next. "There's someone I want to have over tonight. A dinner date. First impressions matter, you know?" I nodded. "Of course. I'll keep to my room." He cleared his throat. "Actually, I was thinking maybe you could go out for the evening?" "Out on a Thursday?" "Maybe dinner with a friend, a movie. You know, give me a few hours to myself." I tried to keep my voice steady. "This is my home, David." "I know," he said, too fast, "and I really appreciate you letting me stay. But this is important." He kissed my cheek and dropped a 20 into my palm like I was the hired help. "Please, Mom, just this once." And like a fool, I agreed. At 5:30 p.m., I put on my beige cardigan, the one with the tiny embroidered flowers, grabbed my purse, and headed for the door. "Have fun," he said, lighting candles on the table like he was proposing marriage. "Love you." I smiled. "You too." I only got halfway down the driveway. Because that's when I realized I'd forgotten my phone. I turned back. The front door was locked. The side door bolted. The garage keypad dead. I knocked, then pounded. No answer. The house, my house, was silent. And then I saw movement in the garage window. Faint, fast, like someone ducking. I tried the garage door. It opened. But the second I stepped in, the door slammed shut behind me, and the lock clicked. I stood there in the dark, stunned, beside the lawnmower, trapped, like a secret, like a burden, like an embarrassment. First, Margaret starts piecing together just how far her son has gone to erase her from his life, and what she finds during her quiet captivity will change everything. The sound of the bolt sliding into place echoed louder than it should have. For a moment, I stood completely still, my purse dangling from my arm, the heels of my shoes slightly sunk into a patch of old lawn fertilizer on the garage floor. I wasn't cold. I wasn't panicking. I was something deeper. I was invisible. The garage smelled like old paint, motor oil, and betrayal. I took a slow step forward and sat on the workbench stool, the one David never used. The last time that thing saw use, my late husband was still alive. He'd tinker in here on Sunday afternoons, radio humming, sawdust in his hair. He used to say this garage was his kingdom. Now it felt more like a cell. I looked toward the thin slit of window near the top of the garage door. Golden light filtered through, barely enough to see, but I didn't need a full view. I could hear everything. Muffled laughter, clinking plates, a woman's voice, light and nervous, asking, "So, is it just you here?" David answered too quickly, "Yeah, just me." Her laughter was cautious. "Oh, I thought you said your mom lived with you." A pause. I leaned in closer. He chuckled. "Nah, I mean, she used to, but she's staying with a friend right now, kinda traveling. You know how it is, retirement and all." Used to? Traveling? As if I were some worn-out coat he'd loaned to someone and forgotten. I pressed my hand to my chest, not out of pain, out of fury, a low, controlled burn, the kind that doesn't flash and fade, the kind that stays. I looked around the garage for something, anything, to distract myself. My old boxes of nurse journals were still there, labeled "Margaret, do not toss," covered in dust. Next to them, a trash bag full of my scarves, cashmere, from my sister who passed. Beside that, a large box labeled "Donate." Inside, my wedding china. I hadn't agreed to donate a thing. Time passed slowly. Every sound from the house rang clear through the air vent above the tool shelf. She was sweet, that girl. I could hear it in her tone. Kind, curious, asking David about his job, if he had any family in the area. He lied so easily, too easily. She was a little overbearing, he said, in a voice that used to ask me for bedtime stories. She just wouldn't let me grow up. He served her dessert on my grandmother's crystal plates. I know because I heard her say, "Wow, these are beautiful." He told her they were just something he found at a vintage store. I closed my eyes. At some point, the overhead garage light blinked on, motion sensor. I stood up, brushing dirt from my cardigan, and looked at my reflection in the window. There I was, gray roots showing, wrinkles where I used to smile, hands still stained from planting daisies in the backyard that morning. I looked tired, but not defeated. I walked to the little cabinet near the water heater and opened it. Still there. The old box of my late husband's tools, duct tape, wire cutters, screwdrivers, emergency candles. And behind the toolbox, tucked away like a secret, his military flashlight. Still worked. I turned it on and let the beam fall across the garage door. Not tonight, Margaret. Not yet. By the time I heard chairs scraping on the floor and the front door opening, I knew what I had to do. I didn't scream, I didn't bang, I didn't demand anything. I simply waited. Because you see, sometimes silence says more than shouting ever could. I heard her voice outside. "Thanks for dinner. It was really nice." And David? He laughed nervously. "You're welcome. I hope you didn't mind the quiet." She paused. "Actually," she said, her voice trailing off. "What?" "I don't know. It just felt like someone else was here. Weird, right?" David chuckled, but it was hollow. "Just you and me." I waited until I heard the sound of her car drive away. Then the silence settled like ash. 30 minutes later, the garage door creaked open. David stood there, looking tired but smug. "Mom?" he said casually, like he'd misplaced me in the grocery store. "You still in here?" I didn't answer. I just stood, facing him, flashlight in one hand, and my purse still over my shoulder like I'd never set it down. He blinked. Why didn't I what?" I asked, stepping forward. He shifted back, clearly uncomfortable. "It was just for a couple hours, Mom." "Oh," I said, "just a couple hours." I walked past him slowly, each step steady, each step mine. The next morning, the sun rose like it always did. Birds chirped, coffee brewed, but something had shifted. Not outside, inside me. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of chamomile, the one tea he never liked. The house was quiet, no clanging plates, no eggs frying. I hadn't made breakfast. For the first time in years, I hadn't. At 8:17, I heard the creak of his door, then the rhythmic sound of his wheelchair wheels down the hallway. "Mom?" He peeked in like nothing had happened. "You didn't make toast?" he asked, rubbing sleep from his eyes. I took a sip of tea. "No?" A pause. Everything okay?" I looked at him fully for the first time that morning. "Yes, David, everything is just as it was." He shuffled to the fridge, pulling out orange juice and one of those sad breakfast bars he always mocked when I bought them. He sat down across from me without another word. I watched him fidget. This was a man who had locked his mother in a garage to impress a stranger. And now he couldn't meet my eyes over orange juice. He cleared his throat. "About last night, I don't want to talk about it," I said calmly. "Oh." More silence. Then, as if he couldn't help himself, he added, "It wasn't a big deal, Mom. I just needed space." I gave a small nod. "You had space." He fumbled. "Right. Yeah, I just didn't know she'd ask so many questions." I almost smiled. She had asked questions, and I had a feeling they weren't the kind he was prepared to answer. After breakfast, if you could call his dry granola bar a breakfast, I went into the living room, sat in my favorite chair, picked up my old crossword puzzle book, let the clock tick like music. I was reclaiming space. Not loudly, not with fights or lectures, but with presence. David rolled in about an hour later. "Hey," he said casually, "I was thinking of making a pasta bake tonight. Maybe you can help?" I didn't look up. "I have plans this evening." That startled him. I could hear it in the way his breath caught. "Plans?" "Yes." "What kind of plans?" "Out of the house ones." He hesitated. "You didn't say anything." "I didn't think I needed to." I met his gaze now. He was searching my face for the mother he knew, the one who apologized before she even spoke, the one who smoothed everything over with cookies and guilt. She wasn't there anymore. He wheeled closer, trying to soften. "Mom, listen, I know you were upset about last night." I closed the puzzle book gently. "You locked me in a garage, David." His eyes dropped. "For hours," I added, "without food or water or even my phone." He opened his mouth, but no words came. "And then you lied about me to her, lied that I wasn't even here." His jaw tightened. "It was just a white lie. I didn't think." "You didn't think I'd know," I corrected. I stood slowly, not out of anger, out of certainty. He watched me walk to the hallway like someone watching an earthquake from across the street, stunned by its stillness, not realizing how much was about to fall. In my room, I opened the closet. I took out my old overnight bag, the navy one with frayed handles and a broken zipper. I wasn't leaving, not yet, but I wanted him to see it, to know the air in this house had changed. and it wasn't his anymore. Folks, in New Chapter, Margaret reaches out to someone from her past, someone who reminds her who she used to be before motherhood became servitude. The navy overnight bag stayed zipped on the end of my bed, staring at me like a dare. I didn't pack it yet, not physically, but something in me already had. I sat on the edge of the mattress and reached for the old wooden jewelry box on my nightstand, the one I hadn't opened in years. It still smelled like cedar and lavender. Inside were pieces of my former self: the silver locket David gave me in 4th grade, the rose brooch Tom bought on our 10th anniversary, and tucked in the bottom, a business card. Claire Alden, MSW, Family Services and Caregiving Transitions. Claire was my niece. She used to call me her real mom when her own was off chasing bad decisions. She grew up, went to grad school, and built a life around helping women like me, the forgotten ones, the ones who gave so much they disappeared. I hadn't called her in years. I stared at the card, thumb brushing the edge. Then I reached for the phone. "Hello?" Her voice was still soft, still musical, like wind chimes on a front porch. "Claire, it's Aunt Margaret." A beat, then a gasp. "Aunt Mags, is everything okay?" I almost said yes. Almost. But instead, I let the silence hang. "Can we talk?" I asked quietly. "Not about emergencies, just talk." "Of course we can," she said immediately. "I'll come by this weekend." "No, I want to come to you." We spoke for 23 minutes. I didn't tell her everything, not yet, but I told her enough. Enough to hear her inhale sharply when I mentioned the garage. Enough for her to ask, "Do you want to come stay for a few days?" Enough for her to say, "You don't have to live like this, Aunt Mags." And that one sentence, it shook something loose in me. I hadn't realized until then just how long I'd been surviving, not living. After the call, I opened my sketchbook. It had been years. Before David moved back in, I used to draw almost every night. Faces, hands, scenes from my window. Little pieces of the world that reminded me I was still here. I found a blank page and wrote 3 words: "Not his anymore." That afternoon, I walked past David in the living room. He looked up from his video game. "Everything all right?" "Lovely," I said, grabbing my coat from the hallway hook. "Where you headed?" "Out." He raised an eyebrow. "You don't usually go out this time of day." I smiled politely. "You don't usually trap me in garages either." And I walked out before he could answer. I went to the library, checked out 2 novels and a biography, then stopped at a small cafe near Main Street, the one I used to love before David moved back in and our budget couldn't stretch for fancy coffee. I sat near the window, sipping slowly, watching people walk by. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the world move without me needing to hold it up. That night, I made dinner, but only 1 plate. My plate. I left a note on the fridge. "David, there's sandwich stuff in the drawer. Help yourself." When I passed the mirror on the way to bed, I didn't look tired. I looked new. In New Chapter, Margaret receives an unexpected invitation that brings back a version of herself she thought was gone forever. It came in the mail. No fanfare, no glitter or gold leaf, just a simple envelope, cream-colored and slightly bent in one corner, with my name handwritten in neat block letters, Margaret Jennings. No mom, no "to the resident of," just me. I sat down at the kitchen table and turned it over. The return address stopped my breath for a second. Walter Brinley, Pine Valley Veterans Arts Center, Charleston, SC. Walter. Tom's friend from the Army. They served together in '82. He was the loud one, the one who made everyone laugh at barbecues and played harmonica terribly but with pride. He and Tom used to tinker with old radios in our garage on weekends. I hadn't seen Walter since Tom's funeral. What could he possibly want? Inside was a folded piece of stationery and a photo. I opened the letter first. Maggie, if I may still call you that, I hope this finds you well. I was going through some of Tom's old sketches we did together at the VA Center years ago, and one had your signature in the corner. I remembered you used to draw too. You had a good hand, better than any of us. I don't know if you still sketch, but if you do, we're hosting a small community show next month. Just local work, nothing fancy, but it's good people, good stories. Thought you might want to send something in. I hope life has been kind. I imagine David must be grown and thriving. You deserve peace, Maggie. You always did. Warmly, Walter. My throat tightened. I looked at the photo. It was black and white, a candid. Tom and Walter, both younger than David is now, laughing over a canvas in their army jackets. Behind them, a tiny corner of the sketch I'd done one rainy Sunday, a bird on a windowsill. He remembered. After all these years, someone remembered me. Not as a mother, not as a widow, but as Margaret. I held the photo in my lap, staring at it like it could breathe. Memories washed over me. How I used to sketch late into the night, music playing in my headphones while the boys slept. How Tom used to say, "You draw like the paper's listening." How I'd once dreamed of teaching art classes at the community college when I retired from nursing, until David moved back and my life narrowed to frozen meals and excuses. But now, a door had cracked open, just a little, and the light felt warm. I placed the letter back into its envelope and tucked it into my jewelry box beside my wedding ring and Claire's business card. And then, like muscle memory, I reached for my sketchbook, the real one, not the one I'd been scribbling in lately to keep sane. I turned to a blank page, picked up my pencil, and let my hand move. First lines were always quiet, hesitant. Then they grew stronger, surer. I wasn't just sketching a face or a flower. I was sketching myself back into being. Later that evening, David passed through the kitchen. "What's that?" he asked, eyeing the open book. "Just a letter," I said. "From who?" "An old friend." He nodded slowly. "Something I should know about?" "No," I said without looking up, "but maybe something I needed to remember." Following new chapter, as Margaret rediscovers her voice through art, a confrontation brews with David that forces both of them to finally face the truth about their relationship. The next few days passed quietly, at least from the outside, but inside me, something was blooming. Every morning, I made a fresh pot of tea and sat at the kitchen table with my sketchbook open, not just doodling, not killing time, creating. Hands, faces, empty chairs, the shadow of a bird in flight. I didn't need a plan, just space. And for once, the house gave me that. David stayed in his room most of the day, playing online games and watching TV. But he was watching me too. I could feel it, those sideways glances, the questions that sounded casual but weren't. "Drawing again? What are you working on? Is that for something?" I'd answer politely, briefly, and then return to my pencil. And every time I didn't explain myself, I could feel his discomfort grow. One afternoon, he rolled into the kitchen, saw my sketchbook, and said lightly, "You know, if you're bored, there's a pile of laundry waiting." I didn't look up. "I'm not bored," I said. "I'm drawing." "Well," he shrugged, "I just thought maybe you wanted to be useful." I closed the sketchbook slowly and met his eyes. "I've been useful for 20 years, David." He blinked. 20 years of laundry, cooking, catheter care, bed baths, phone calls, paperwork, screaming matches with your insurance company. He shifted in his wheelchair, suddenly very small. "You were my mother," he mumbled. "Yes," I said, "and you were my son, not my master." The air between us snapped tight, like an elastic pulled too far. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from guilt, from unease. Something in his tone, the way he said useful, it echoed in my mind. I wandered the house quietly, letting my feet carry me. Past his door, down the hallway, past the old laundry closet, until I stopped at the small cabinet in the guest room. He used to store his things there before we turned the room into my art space. I hadn't opened it in a while. Inside were some old files, a tangle of extension cords, and a shoebox. I lifted the box. It was heavier than it should have been. Inside, envelopes, printed forms, a few copies of medical reports, and a folder with my name on it. I opened it slowly. Inside were letters from the county, from the state, all addressed to David, some dated as far back as last year. One in particular stopped me cold. Caregiver stipend adjustment. As per the updated approval for in-home caregiving services provided by Margaret Jennings on behalf of David Jennings, the monthly stipend will be increased retroactively. Retroactively? By nearly $400 a month, and he had never said a word. I sat down on the bed, the letter in my hand, not because I cared about the money, but because of what it meant. He had been receiving funds, using my name, my labor, and saying nothing. No offer to share it, no thank you, no acknowledgement that I was not just a warm body who appeared with meals and meds. He had turned my care into a transaction, and I hadn't even been allowed to read the invoice. The next morning, he came into the kitchen. "Morning," he said casually, pouring juice. I handed him the letter. He stared at it, lips tightening. "Oh," he said. "That," I repeated. He fumbled. "It's not as bad as it looks." "It looks like fraud," I said evenly. He went pale. "No, Mom, come on. It's legal. They send the money to me because I'm the primary client. That's just how it works." "But you didn't tell me," I said. "You cashed those checks. You bought games, pizza, God knows what, while I changed your sheets and clipped your toenails." He looked cornered. "I needed the money, and I didn't think it would matter. You always said you didn't want to be paid." "That was before I knew you were getting paid." He rolled backward, arms crossed, defiant now. "You don't get it," he said. "You left me once already when I was little. Dad died and you went numb. I had to do everything. Now you're doing it again, disappearing into that sketchbook like I don't exist." I stared at him, stunned. Then, very quietly, I said, "I didn't go numb, David. I went silent to protect you." He looked away, and I walked out of the room without saying another word. Then in new chapter, Margaret reaches out to Claire and takes her first real step toward a future where she chooses herself. Claire's apartment was nothing like my house. Minimalist, yes, but not cold. Soft rugs, warm walls, a pot of something herbal steaming in the kitchen. There were books everywhere, framed quotes, and little painted rocks with words like breathe, heal, and enough stacked on the windowsill. And it smelled like freedom. She hugged me like she used to when she was 10, tight, all elbows, no rush. Then she held me by the arms and looked at me. "Aunt Mags," she said softly, "you look different." "I feel different," I admitted. She guided me to the table and poured tea, chamomile, my favorite. "Tell me everything." And so I did. I told her about the garage, the voodoo doll laughter of that dinner party, the checks, the silence, the file folder that finally opened my eyes. She didn't interrupt, not once. And when I finally said, "I don't know what I'm supposed to do now," Claire leaned forward and said 4 words that shifted the ground beneath my feet. You're not supposed to. You don't have to know what to do, she explained gently. That's the trap. Women like us are trained to have a plan, a solution, a smile. You don't need all that. You just need to decide that this version of life, the one where you're erased, isn't enough. I stared at her, blinking. No one had said that to me, not once, not even in all the years of well-meaning sympathy. Then she pulled out a slim binder and laid it between us. Here's what we can do. Inside were pamphlets, legal forms, a printed email chain with a caregiving advocacy group, a brochure for a place called Willow Creek, a short-term residential facility for adult children with mobility needs, offering respite for long-term caregivers. Just a trial, she said, a weekend or a week, to breathe, think. My hand hovered over the pages. It'll upset him, I murmured. Of course it will, she said plainly. You've been the air he breathes for 20 years. But Margaret, don't you want to find out what your own air smells like? That hit me. Not like a slap, like a hand on my shoulder after a long, dark walk. We went over the forms. Claire explained them simply, respectfully. She didn't push. She just lit the path and let me choose how far I wanted to walk. I didn't sign anything yet, but when I stood to leave, I took the folder with me. And that felt like the beginning of something I didn't know how to name, only that it didn't taste like guilt or duty. It tasted like possibility. In New Chapter, Margaret returns home and for the first time says no with clarity and calm, and watches how David reacts when control slips through his fingers. The house felt smaller when I walked in. Not in a bad way, just contained, like it no longer stretched to fill my entire identity. The kitchen was exactly as I'd left it, neat, quiet, sterile. David's wheelchair tracks still traced a lazy path between fridge and couch like they always did, but the house didn't breathe like him anymore. It breathed like me. "Where have you been?" he asked as I stepped in, coat still on. I turned and looked at him. Not with fear, not with guilt, just directly. "I went to see Claire," I said, hanging up my coat. "Claire?" His voice sharpened. "Why?" "To talk." He blinked. "About what?" "About me." That threw him. He opened his mouth, then shut it again, then rolled into the kitchen. "You didn't leave anything ready for lunch," he muttered. "I had to eat frozen waffles." I nodded. "You know where the toaster is." A pause. He turned in his chair, incredulous. "What's going on with you?" I stepped to the cabinet, took down a mug, and poured myself tea, the kind Claire had given me. Then I turned to him. "Nothing's going on," I said softly. "I'm just not doing everything anymore." You'd think I'd slapped him. He froze, lips parted, eyes wide. "I don't get it. I thought we were okay. I'm not angry," I said, "but I'm also not invisible anymore." He shook his head. "What, you go talk to Claire and suddenly you think you're better than me?" "No," I said calmly. "I remember I was someone before you needed me, and I still am." Silence fell like a curtain. I could feel the panic bubbling in him, not from cruelty, but from fear. Fear of change, of not being the center, of a world where he wasn't the gravity pulling everyone down. He reached for his last weapon. "I guess I'll just rot here while you go out and find yourself," he said bitterly. I took a slow sip of tea. "You'll be fine," I said. "You've got government support, you've got a working phone, working hands, and a list of services I've already set up for you." He blinked again, caught off guard. "Wait, what do you mean services?" "I'll explain later," I said. "But for now, David." I stepped onto the back porch, into the golden light of the late afternoon. "I'm going to sit outside, alone, with my tea. You'll survive." And I did. I sat in that rusty lawn chair, wrapped in an old shawl, sipping tea like it was the first real cup I'd had in years. The breeze moved gently. A bird landed on the fence. And in that quiet moment, I realized something profound. I didn't have to yell. I didn't have to fight. All I had to do was stop saying yes. New chapter. Margaret reconnects with someone from her past, bringing both warmth and tension. And David sees, for the first time, that he may no longer be the center of her world. The phone rang just after breakfast. Not the house phone. I'd let that one gather dust. But my cell, the one Claire had practically forced into my hand last year, saying, "Text me. No excuses. You're still allowed to exist." The screen lit up with an unfamiliar number from South Carolina. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello? Maggie?" The voice was warm, scratchy with age, but full of life. "It's Walter Brinley. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." I smiled before I could stop myself. "Walter, no, not a bad time at all. You caught me mid-dish towel." "Well then, tell that towel it's got competition. I've got a favor to ask." I laughed, a real one, the kind that didn't get stuck in my throat or need permission. Walter told me he'd loved the sketch I'd sent, the one of Tom from memory, leaning against the fence with his old army cap and crooked smile. Said it made the VA Art Center folks cry. Said I still had it. "I'm not sure what I have," I said, "but I'm glad someone saw something." "I saw Maggie," he said softly. "Not Mom, not widow, just Maggie. She's still there." Then he cleared his throat, and I could practically hear the smile stretching across the line. "We're having a community potluck next Friday. Nothing fancy. Casseroles, bad coffee, decent company. I'd love it if you came down. Stay the weekend. There's a guest room here at the center. It's clean and quiet. We'll hang up some of your work." My heart fluttered like it hadn't in years. I don't know," I said. "It's a long drive." "That's why God invented Greyhound, or Claire, or stubbornness, and I know you've still got that." After I hung up, I sat on the edge of the guest bed, holding the phone to my chest. A soft breeze moved through the window, and I smiled. Not politely, not automatically, but wide and full, like someone had taken the weight off my chest for just long enough to let the air in again. That afternoon, I called Claire. "Guess who's getting invited to a potluck?" I teased. She shrieked in delight. "You better pack your good earrings." "I don't have any good earrings." "You do now. Amazon's a miracle." We talked about arrangements. I didn't make promises yet. David still had his routine. But Claire said she could come over for a few days. She even offered to stay at the house. "I've got a cot," she said, "and earplugs. Let me do this." I exhaled, and for the first time, I started to imagine myself somewhere else, not as an escape, but as a beginning. A table with strangers, laughter in a room I didn't clean, music I didn't have to turn down. Not running from home, just visiting myself again. Then I called Claire. "Guess who's getting invited to a potluck?" I teased. She shrieked in delight. "You better pack your good earrings." "I don't have any good earrings." "You do now. Amazon's a miracle." We talked about arrangements. I didn't make promises yet. David still had his routine. But Claire said she could come over for a few days. She even offered to stay at the house. "I've got a cot," she said, "and earplugs. Let me do this." I exhaled, and for the first time, I started to imagine myself somewhere else, not as an escape, but as a beginning. A table with strangers, laughter in a room I didn't clean, music I didn't have to turn down. Not running from home, just visiting myself again. The roast chicken smelled like memory. Warm, buttery rosemary tucked just beneath the skin. My old Sunday recipe. Claire had insisted we use it, said, "It'll feel familiar, but this time you sit at the head of the table." So I did. For the first time in years, I wasn't serving. I wasn't checking cushions or cutting food. I just sat there, napkin folded, water glass full, and watched my family gather. Claire, Ruth, even old cousin Harold with his 2 loud stories. And at the end of the table, David, silent, suspicious. The conversation hummed around me. Claire told a story about her dog. Ruth chimed in with a complaint about parking. Laughter flowed like warm cider. And then, like a lull before thunder, the table quieted. David cleared his throat. "I just want to say how nice it is," he began, "to all be here, as a family, after everything." He looked right at me. "And I'm glad Mom's finally letting herself rest. I mean, 20 years is a long time, but she never had to do it all. It was her choice." My fork clinked softly against my plate. I saw Claire flinch, and I set it down. Very slowly, I stood. The room stilled like a stopped clock. "David," I said calmly, "I didn't do it because it was a hobby. I did it because you were my son, because I loved you, because the world handed me a broken thing, and I thought if I just try hard enough, maybe I can keep him whole." He opened his mouth. I held up a hand. "I gave up job offers. I lost friends. I stopped painting. I missed weddings and funerals. I bathed you when you couldn't lift your head. I fought insurance companies while you played video games. I stayed because you were mine." A silence thicker than grief filled the room. "You knew I'd never ask for help," I continued, "and you used that. You hid money meant for me. You lied. You expected me to serve and smile, and I did, until I couldn't anymore." David's face twisted. "You don't understand what it's like." "You're right," I said. "I don't understand what it's like to be you. But you have never tried to understand what it's like to be me." Claire's eyes shone. Ruth looked down. And David? He sat frozen, as if the weight of truth had just landed in his lap, heavier than any chair could hold. I let the words settle, not like stones, but like seeds. Then I sat down again, folded my napkin, lifted my water glass, and with the calm of a woman who had finally stopped swallowing everything, I said simply, "I'm not angry. I'm awake." No one said a word, but for the first time in decades, I didn't need them to. In New Chapter, Margaret receives a letter from Walter that stirs memories, hope, and one unexpected truth. The letter came on a Tuesday. Tucked among utility bills and a catalog I didn't remember signing up for, there it was. A cream-colored envelope, no return address, but the handwriting unmistakable. Walter's cursive looked like it came from another century, steady, unhurried, the kind they don't teach anymore. Inside was one folded page and a photo. I held it to my chest before opening it. Then I sat at the kitchen table, lit a candle, and read. Dear Maggie, I wasn't sure whether to write this or not, but then I remembered that the Maggie I knew was never afraid of a little honesty, even when it stung. I saw that sketch you sent, the one of Tom. You captured him so well, I swear I heard him laugh through the paper. But what struck me most wasn't the shading or the lines. It was the tenderness. You still have it. And I don't just mean the talent, I mean the part of you that sees. I paused, the photo trembling slightly in my hand. It was from the late 80s. Tom, in his denim jacket, laughing with Walter on the dock behind Lake Penny's old bait shop. I was in the background, holding a sketch pad and smirking like I knew something they didn't. My God, I'd forgotten that version of me even existed. You spent 20 years holding someone together, Maggie. That's not weakness. That's devotion. But now you've got to ask yourself, who's holding you? I think you know the answer. It's time. There's a spare seat here at the potluck, and a spare seat in my truck if you ever want to take a drive out to Penny's Dock. I still remember where the fish hide. With respect, admiration, and an old man's hope, Walter. I read it 3 times. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I needed to let it soak into places that had gone dry. The candle flickered gently as I looked back at the photo. I wasn't young in it, not exactly, but I looked alive, full of my own thoughts, my own hands, my own eyes. And in this still kitchen, with no one demanding anything from me, I realized I wasn't grieving. I was remembering. And remembering wasn't painful anymore. It was permission. Dear in new chapter, David finds the letter and his panic turns into confrontation, but Margaret no longer wavers. I found him in the kitchen, clutching the letter like it was a court summons. His face was flushed, not with heat, but with panic. "You weren't going to tell me?" he said. I didn't answer right away. I calmly rinsed my teacup and set it in the sink. "That letter was for me," I said gently. "You're planning to leave?" His voice cracked on the last word, not from rage, but from the kind of fear only someone who's always had control can feel when it's finally slipping. I dried my hands on the dish towel. "I'm planning to live," I said. He pushed the letter toward me, crumpled and creased now. Who is this guy anyway? Some old flame showing up out of nowhere like it's a damn movie? "Walter was your father's best friend," I said, "and he's been more honest with me in 1 letter than you have in 5 years. He flinched. I didn't say it cruelly, just clearly. "So that's it?" he snapped. "You're just gonna run off with some man and leave me here to rot?" I looked him straight in the eye. "No, David, I'm not running. I'm reclaiming." He laughed bitterly. "You're my mother." "I am, and I always will be. But I'm also more than that, and I forgot that for 2 decades. He stared at me, breathing hard. I could feel the power shift, not like a fight being won, more like gravity remembering how to pull me back to earth. "I took care of you," I said. "I fed you, fought for you, stayed when others left. But I will not apologize for wanting a day, a week that's mine." "You're being selfish," he muttered. I smiled sadly. "No, honey, I was selfish when I let myself disappear." He looked like a boy again then, a boy in a chair too big for him, angry, hurt, scared of what it meant to be left without a full-time witness. "I'll be here," I said, "but not just here. And if you want to know what that means, you're going to have to start seeing me as a person." He didn't respond. He didn't throw the letter. He didn't cry. He just sat there, and I left him with it. Not as punishment, but as his first real chance to understand who I was before I became a nurse, a chauffeur, a housekeeper, a schedule. Before I became a ghost with a gentle voice. In New Chapter, Margaret says no for the final time, not in anger, but with grace, and sets the future in motion. The morning was still. One of those rare southern mornings where the sun was gentle, the air didn't cling, and the world felt like it had paused, just for you. I sat on the porch with my coffee, wrapped in the old cardigan Tom used to wear when he read the Sunday paper. The birds were loud that day, almost celebratory. And then the screen door creaked. David. He rolled out quietly, stopping just beside the porch steps. His face was tight, calculating, but there was something else behind it now. Not confidence, nervousness. "I've been thinking," he started, voice too casual. I took a sip. "That makes two of us," I said softly. He chuckled like he used to when he tried to talk me out of grounding him as a teenager. "I think maybe we rushed into all this. You being so independent, me handling stuff on my own. Maybe it's not as easy as we thought." I didn't answer. Just let the breeze fill the silence between us. "I mean," he continued, "you're good at caregiving. It's just who you are, and I'm used to it. So what if we just went back, to how it was?" He smiled like he was offering me something generous. I turned and looked at him, really looked. And for once, I didn't see my baby. I didn't see the boy I'd bathed, or the man I'd dressed, or the patient I'd protected. I saw a grown man who had forgotten I was a person with a choice. "No," I said, quiet, clear, not a tremble in my voice. His smile cracked. "What?" I said, "No, David." I set my coffee down and folded my hands in my lap. I'm not going back to that version of us. I'm not giving up what little of myself I finally found. "But you love me," he said, voice rising. "I do." "Then why would you?" "Because I love myself now, too." He stared at me like I'd spoken a language he'd never learned. And maybe I had. He didn't storm off. He didn't shout. He just sat there, blinking, stunned, while the birds kept chirping and the morning kept unfolding without his permission. I picked up my coffee again and whispered, almost kindly, "I'll always be your mother, but I'm not your anchor anymore." And just like that, something shifted, not just in him, in me. The moment I said no was the moment I remembered I never needed to ask for space. I just needed to take it. In New Chapter, Margaret speaks her final truth in front of the entire family, and the room is never the same again. The table was set for 6. Roast beef, mashed potatoes, green beans with almonds, the kind of meal that used to say, "Everything's fine." Claire had done most of the work, bless her heart. I made the pie. David sat quietly across from me, his napkin folded perfectly on his lap, the same way I used to do for him when his hands were too weak. Everyone smiled, politely, tensely, forks clicked, cups clinked. The illusion held for a moment. And then I stood. "I want to say something," I said softly. Claire looked up, alert. Ruth paused mid-bite. David flinched. I placed both hands gently on the table, not to command the room, but to steady myself. "For 20 years, I began, I poured myself into caregiving, for my son, for this family, for everyone but myself." David shifted. "I did it out of love. I don't regret that love, but I regret forgetting that I still existed." Ruth opened her mouth to interject, then thought better of it. I continued. "I was so afraid of being selfish that I let myself disappear. I convinced myself that quiet pain was holy, that patience meant silence, that sacrifice made me worthy. My voice didn't shake. It rang, not loud, but clear. I was wrong." David looked up at me, eyes wide, not angry, not defensive, just startled like he'd never seen me before. I'm not angry with anyone at this table, I said, but I will not carry what doesn't belong to me anymore. I turned my eyes to him. To you, David, I gave everything I had, and you forgot that it was a gift, not a job, not a debt I owed. Claire wiped a tear. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the kitchen light. I breathed in. And from this day forward, I will not live as a shadow. I will love you, all of you, but I will not beg to be seen. I sat down slowly, lifted my fork, and for the first time in 2 decades, took a bite of my own food while it was still warm. No one said a word. They didn't need to, because something had shifted in that room, not violently, not loudly, but undeniably. I was no longer the help. I was the woman of the house. Then meets new chapter. Margaret starts a morning unlike any other, with no weight on her shoulders and a cinnamon roll she doesn't have to share. The cinnamon roll was still warm. I sat alone at a corner table by the window of Pine Hill Cafe, wrapped in a soft blue sweater, steam rising from my cup. Outside, the town moved slowly. Dog walkers, delivery vans, a teenager unlocking a bike with one earbud in. And me, a 63-year-old woman eating breakfast with both hands free. No phone calls, no requests, no schedule. Just the sound of a spoon tapping gently against porcelain. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt quiet, like when a thunderstorm finally clears and the house is still standing. Maybe a little worn, but whole. The kind of stillness that doesn't ask for applause, just peace. The waitress passed by and smiled. "Refill, hun?" I nodded. "Yes, please." She poured gently, then looked at the empty chair across from me. "Waiting on someone?" I shook my head. "No, ma'am, just me today." She gave a kind smile, the kind that doesn't pity, just understands. And when she walked away, I took my first bite. Sweet, buttery, soft in the center, and mine. Not divided, not rushed, not eaten cold at the kitchen counter while folding someone else's laundry. In my purse was a small sketchbook, not because I had to carry it, but because I wanted to. Walter had mailed me another postcard that week, just a hand-drawn trout and the words, "Lake's thawing early this year. Come visit when you're ready. Bring your pencils." I didn't know if I'd go. Not yet. But I knew this. I could go. And the freedom of that truth was more delicious than any icing on the plate in front of me. Outside the cafe, the sky had turned a soft kind of gold. I picked up my pen, flipped open a page, and began to draw the view out the window. Not for anyone else. Not to prove anything. Just to see if I still could. And I could, and I did, and I will again.